prior to this taking place in 1455, Nicholas V, which was a pope, had gotten together with the head of Portugal, and he passed a papal which was called Dum Devarius. And in this papal, they had now, because they were losing the battle in Constantinople against the Ottoman Empire, they determined at this point that they are going to decree that all people that are of Berber descent or Saracens, that they are now being relinquished and dispelled and being imposed onto them, that they are now put under perpetual servitude back to the Roman Catholic Church. And so pretty much that they are entitled now, as a decree of this Dum Devarius, that they deserve to be enslaved.
This was the Piri-Reis map, and you know this famous map. It shows the New World and Antarctica hundreds of years before they were rediscovered. Piri-Reis, by the way, was a cartographer from Istanbul, but when Columbus wanted to sail to the New World, he first approached King John of Portugal for financing. King John refused, so Columbus went to Portugal's enemies, Spain and England. Queen Isabella of Spain came up with the money first, and the rest is history. But Templar history tells a different story. They say Portugal refused to finance Columbus because they already knew about the New World. Knights Templar had been sailing there for years. Portugal was populated by so many knights that it was considered a Templar nation. In fact, the word Portugal means port of the Gauls, but Templars say it really means port of the Grail. Knights Templar history says they were trading with Native American tribes for years. That's where they got a lot of their gold. And the Templars had a very good relationship with the people of the New World. Columbus knew this. How do we know? Well, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria all flew flags with the Templar cross. He knew the natives would recognize this symbol and be peaceful. And they were at first. Sadly, the Europeans didn't return the favor.
Okay guys, we are back in this book. I've read it before. It's called Nature Knows No Color Line by J.A. Rogers. This book was published in 1952. Waite says an interesting gradation of all shades down to the black is exhibited by the Jews, especially dark were the Jews of Spain and Portugal. Okay, very important point. The Jews of Spain and Portugal, the people whose kids were taken to Santo Tomé, they were always black people, guys. Okay, don't believe those lies that they were white. No, it's not true. The Portuguese Jews were very dark, says Precard. And why were they very dark? Because like I showed you in one of the books that we read before, they did not mingle with the inhabitants of the land. They didn't mingle with the Caucasian and the other people that were around. No. Okay, they only had kids with their own people, guys. Okay, they maintained the purity of their race. The Duchess d'Ambrance, wife of Napoleon's ambassador to Portugal, said that the Jew, the Negro, and the Portuguese could be seen in a single person. Why? Because the Jews, the Negro, and the Portuguese were the same people, the same race, guys. Okay, so dark were the Jews, especially of Portugal and southern Spain, that many whites thought that all the Jews were black or dark. It's actually very funny, guys, because today everyone believes that all the Jews, all the Israelites are white people, but they are not, guys. Okay, the Jews were originally dark and they were always dark, guys. Okay, we're in this book now called History of the Jews by Henrik Greats. Okay, this is volume 4. This book was published, oh my god, guys, 1618. This is one of the earliest books I've ever showed you guys on this channel. This book is old as shit. Okay, 1618. Let's see what this book says. King Zhao, this was a king who was reigning at that time. He had taken power in Spain, went still further in his cruel dealings with the unhappy Spanish Jews, the children of from 3 to 10 years of age whose parents had become slaves. So he enslaved the Spanish Jews. This king, this evil king, enslaved the Spanish Jews of that era. Okay, so he ordered that their children from the age of 3 to 10 years of age whose parents had become slaves, he ordered them to be transplanted by sea to the newly discovered St. Thomas or Lost Islands. If you don't know where St. Thomas is, guys, it's just off the coast of Nigeria, guys. Okay, there's a small island that you can see to the south of Nigeria. That is where St. Thomas is. So this evil king sent those kids there from the age of 3 to 10. He sent them there to be reared in the tenets of Christianity. The weeping of the mothers and sobbing of the children, the rage of the fathers who tore their hair in agony, did not move the heartless despot, talking about the king, to recall his command. Mothers entreated to be allowed to go with their children, threw themselves at the king's feet as he came out of church, and implored him to leave them, at least the youngest of kids, the ones that still need their mothers. But this king was wicked, guys. Okay, Don Zhao had them dragged. This Don Zhao is the king. He's still the same king, Zhao or Joao. Okay, Don Zhao had them dragged from his path like bitches who had their whelps torn from them. It is to be wondered at that mothers with their children in their arms sprang into the sea to rest united in its depths. The island of St. Thomas, where the little ones were taken, were full of lizards and venomous snakes and inhabited by criminals transported there from Portugal. Most of the children perished on the journey, oh my god, or became the prey of wild beasts. Among the survivors, it happened that brothers and sisters, in ignorance of their relationship, married each other. Oh my god. Perhaps the king's barbarity to the Jews must be accounted for by the bitter gloom which mastered him at the death of his only legitimate son. So that king, his son was killed. Okay, he's a legit son who got killed. Wow, it's crazy, guys. Okay, but I want you guys to see what really happened to the children of the Spanish Jews. Many of the parents were enslaved in Spain and Portugal. Many of them, I will show you guys in other books, actually got sent to the Americas as slaves. Many of them fled into Africa to avoid this persecution that they were going through during that time. But their children, very important that you realize that their children were sent to Santo Tomé Island. Okay, and guess what, guys? They are still there today. Let me show you guys a few pictures of the people in Santo Tomé. Yeah, these black people you are seeing here, guys, these are the Spanish Jews. Okay, these are their kids. Many of them don't know, a few of them might know, but the majority of them don't know. And based on these books, most of them today are Christians, guys. Okay, that's one of the things that these kings did. He made sure that they were converted. Those kids were converted into Christianity. Okay, the religion of the Caucasian race. Okay, that is something I will show you guys in a different book, but for now I want you guys to see. It's very important that we know who certain people are, guys. Okay, the Negro race as a whole, not a little bit, as a whole, are the Israelites. Okay, including our brothers and sisters in Santo Tomé Island. Very powerful stuff, guys. Okay, very, very powerful. Okay, guys, let's see this book. This book is called New World Jewry. Okay, this book was published by a man named Seymour B. Liebman. Okay, this book was actually published very recently, 1982, guys. Okay, it's not a very old book. As a result of the Spanish expulsion in 1492, King John II of Portugal had permitted approximately 100,000 Spanish Jews to enter his kingdom upon the payment of 8 crudados for each adult. Children at the breast were exempt from the payment. Okay, so he didn't collect any payments for little kids. During the 8-month period, many Jews who had not paid the entry fee or who were illegal immigrants were caught, oh my god, and sold as slaves. So these Jews who tried to get back into Spain, okay, but they didn't have the money to pay because they had to pay about how much? 8 crudados for each adult. Okay, those who didn't have the money for that, what happened to them? They were caught and sold as slaves. Many young children, especially those whose parents had been sold as slaves, oh my god, were deported to the island of Santo Tomé. Then a recent Portuguese discovery off the coast of Africa, okay, literally off the coast of Nigeria, guys. Many of the children were between 3 and 10 years old in age, In Saint Tome, they were read as Catholics. You see, they were taught Christianity to destroy them, to discontinue them from their heritage. Today, there are so many Negroes, not just in Saint Tome, but in Africa, in America, who are Christians, and they don't realize that Christianity was used as a tool to discontinue them, the Negroes, from their heritage. The exact same way that Islam, yes, Islam, was also used to discontinue many Negroes today from their heritage. Okay, both those religions and even other religions too were being used to discontinue the Negro from his heritage. The Negro is an Israelite. Okay, he's not a Christian, he's not a Muslim. The bereaved parents prostrated themselves at the feet of the king on a Sunday as he was leaving church and implored him to withdraw the decree of exile. King John was succeeded by his cousin and brother-in-law Manuel. One of Manuel's friends was Abraham Zacuto, a Jew and famous astronomer. It may be due to this friendship that King Manuel freed the Jews who had been sold into slavery. He also ordered the return to Portugal of those children who had survived and were in Saint Tome. Manuel refused a gift of money offered to him by the Jews for his gracious acts. Okay, so this new guy was a nice guy for a while, right? Let's see what happened next. Okay, that's the thing about all these other nations. Okay, so every now and then they are nice to the Israelites, but eventually something snaps and then they become evil again. Okay, so let's see what happened. Shortly thereafter, let me just zoom from right here. Shortly thereafter, the king, this new king, King Manuel, sought the hand in marriage of Isabella, the widowed daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella. The royal consent to the marriage was given on the condition that Manuel also expelled the Jews. A marriage contract was signed on November 30th, 1496. Less than a week later, on December 4th, 1496, Manuel decreed that all Jews, native born as well as immigrants, had to leave Portugal by October 1497 under penalty of death and confiscation of all their property. However, there were no constraints on what could be taken by those electing to depart. He also stipulated that all Jewish children under 14 years of age were to be taken from their parents and converted and raised as Catholics at the expense of the king. Oh my God. One thing about all these kings, all these rulers in the world, even till today, they might be nice with the Negro for a while. They might smile at the Negro, but eventually, guys, they always turn around and reveal their true color. Okay, that's the reality. And many of them, they hate the Negroes, guys. They hate the Jews. Okay, so when you go over to Saint Tome today, guys, this is my point, and you see those Negro children. Those Negro children are the children of the Spanish Jews. They are the Spanish Jews. They are descendants. Okay, although many of them don't have any memory of this. That is who they are, guys. Okay, very powerful stuff. Okay, that's crazy. History is crazy if you guys go through it. Here we are in this book, guys, titled Commentaries on Hebrew and Christian Mythology by George Parish B. Ladd, I guess. This book was published in the year 1896, guys. Okay, very old book. Let's see what this book has for us. Okay, guys, here we are on this page, we're on page 198. Okay, we're going to start from right here. In the time of the first crusading spirit, in the cities of Treves, Metz, Mainz, Worms, Spires, Strasbourg, and other smaller places, the streets were deluged with the blood of Jews. These were Negroes, blood of Negro Jews, even though it doesn't say so in this book, and other unbelievers at the hands of those pious warriors. The Jews were expelled from Vienna, I think Vienna is in Germany, in 1196, from Mecklenburg in 1225, from Breslau in 1226, from Brandenburg in 1243, from Frankfurt in 1241, from Munich in 1285, from Nuremberg in 1380, and from Prague in 1391, also from Ratisbon in 1476. So these are places that are in Europe. I feel like most of these places here are in Germany though. It sounds very German to me, but let's keep going. From 1346 to 1350, the Jews were murdered by thousands until the race in Germany became nearly extinct. Okay, so this is what happened to those Negroes. Okay, the ones that didn't mix, they were killed. Many of them were murdered or expelled, forced to go into Africa. These were the two choices they had. If they didn't flee from the land to run into Africa, many of them were forcibly converted into Christianity, or they were, made slaves, guys. Okay, in fact, many of them who became Christians still became slaves, as I will show you guys in a different book. So from 1346 to 1350, the Jews, the Negro Jews, these are black people, okay, were murdered by thousands until the race in Germany became nearly extinct. They were being murdered by the Aryans. Okay, I showed you guys in the previous book about the invasions by the Aryan race. That's what you're reading about right here, guys. In Switzerland, the Christians commenced to persecute the Jews about the middle of the 14th century. The 14th century, that is the 1300s, okay? And in the 15th century, they were expelled from the principal cities in that country. In Spain, now let's see what happened to the Spanish Jews. During the 6th and 7th centuries, the Jews were persecuted without mercy. When the Moors invaded Spain, the Jews lent a helping hand. Why? Why did the Jews lend a helping hand to the Moors? Well, even though it doesn't say so in this book, guys, these Moors and these Jews are actually the same race of people. The only difference between a Jew and a Moor is that a Moor is a Muslim, okay? Just like we have Muslim Negroes today and we have Christian Negroes. That's what you're seeing here. You're seeing Jews who were still, for the most part, keeping the laws of God. And then you had other people who were also Israelites, who were what? Who are unfortunately keeping the laws of Islam. That's what you're reading right here, guys. That is why the Jews lent a helping hand, because they are the same people. So glad were they to escape Christian tortures. These Christian tortures were by the Aryans, the Caucasians, guys. Remember, I'll show you guys in another book that Christianity is the religion of the Caucasian race, guys. It's not for all people, it's for them. They were made equal wherever the Moors held sway. So the Jews and the Moors, they saw themselves as brothers because they were brothers, guys. While in the Christian provinces, the persecution were carried on in the refined manner known only to the followers of the cross. Those are white people right there, guys. When you hear that shit, white people, majority white people. In 1391 to 1392, in 5 provinces held by the followers of Christ, untold numbers of Jews, black people, were murdered. Okay, very important stuff right there. And their property was confiscated to the church. Escape, says one historian, was possible only through flights to where? To Africa, where their brothers were. They knew their brothers were from there, man. They ran back there, okay? Or by accepting baptism. Become a Christian. Stop being a Jew, you Negro. Stop being a Jew. At the point of the sword, the number of converts so made at the time has been estimated at 200,000. Probably much more than that, guys. Such a vast number of stubborn Jews so quickly converted and thereby brought under the mild influence of Christianity must have been gratifying to the followers of Christ. These are the white people here, guys. Very important that you understand that these followers of Christ, he's talking about the Caucasian race. Okay, so listen to this, guys. In speaking of this affair, one writer writes, the fate of the Jews in Spain during the 15th century beggars description. He further says, persecutions, violent conversions, massacre, and the torture of the Inquisition. We read of nothing else. They were, man, great atrocities, guys, were committed upon the black Negro Jews over there, guys. Great atrocities, okay? At length, the hour of final horror came when in 1492, an edict was issued from those pious rulers. Ferdinand and Isabella, these guys were the monarchs of Spain, okay? At this point, they had invaded Spain. They were Caucasians, guys. They had taken over Spain. And let's see what they did next. By which the Jews were given 4 months within which to leave the country empty-handed, to accept baptism, or to suffer death. Damn it, guys, okay? So these people right here, Ferdinand and Isabella, these are Caucasians, these are Edomites, guys, okay? White people, after they had invaded and taken over Spain and even Portugal as well, they decided to kick out the Spanish Jews. The Spanish Jews were the one running the country at that time before, but our power was dwindling, guys, okay? These are those the curses of Deuteronomy chapter 28 taking place right here. The stranger that is within you shall get up above you very high, and you, the Israelites, shall come down very low. That is what we are literally reading right here, guys. That is what we are reading. Because initially, the whole of Europe was run by the Negroes who were here, guys. But then white people came in. Initially, the white people were weak. over time, because of those curses that God put on the Israelites, the stranger rose in power, and the Israelites did what? They dwindled, they languished, okay, and eventually they became the slaves, while the people who were initially the slaves became the masters, guys. Okay, that's what happened. That's what you are reading right here, guys. Terrible stuff. It's terrible. You are reading about the fall of the Negro race, okay, the Jews. Oh man. But don't worry though, that fall is not forever. It's not a forever fall. We'll be back. We shall be back, okay? Okay, so let's read some more on this King Manuel, okay? He was a descendant of King John II, okay, of Portugal. Let's see what he did. Because at the time, he was being nice to the Israelites for a while, to the Jews. He was nice to them. He told them to come back to Portugal for a period, okay? He was nice for a period, okay? But let's see what happened next. King Manuel, in the tenderness of his Christian heart, he decided to what? To sell many into slavery of the more common Jews. And by an edict, he ordered all the children under 14 of age of the better class to be taken from their parents and turned over to the Christian brothers and brought up in their true faith in Christianity, guys, okay? So once again, he re-enslaved the mind of the children of the Jews, the Negro Jews who were there in Portugal, guys, okay?
That's what took place. At the time, Italy had a massive sugarcane addiction, and the sugar that was brought into Europe came from India. So the Ottoman Empire took back over Constantinople. When they did that, Roman Catholic Church lost their way to get to India. And because they lost their way to get to India, they had a massive sugarcane addiction in Europe. Leaders, the elite, they were all addicted to sugar. And because of this was the driving force, because sugarcane is as powerful as cocaine. This was the driving force to create the transatlantic slave trade. And what they decided is, we're going to make these people that took over the western side of the Byzantine Empire, we're going to force them into perpetual servitude in order for us to supply our desires for sugar and have them work for us. And so that's how the transatlantic slave trade happened. It started between the Roman Empire with Nicholas V and him talking to the head of Portugal and them determining that from that day onward that they're going to enslave Africans. And it didn't take place in 1455. The Papal went through several revisions, and I think around 1516 or somewhere around that window, that's when Portugal decided to invade Angola. And from there, that's when Portugal went in to get human cargo. And Portugal also sailed over to Brazil, killed off a lot of the natives, and decided, well, now we don't actually have enough workforce, so we definitely need to go into Africa at this point. And that's what pushed them to go into Angola.
A one-of-a-kind manuscript written by a slave has now been preserved in the Library of Congress. The Arabic language autobiography spent decades in private collections before the library acquired it in 2017. Now it has been digitized for the world to read. And Amna Nawaz reports on the manuscript's remarkable journey for our ongoing Arts and Culture series, Canvas.
Born and raised in West Africa, Omar ibn Said was 37 years old when he was kidnapped and taken to America as a slave in the 1800s.
Before I came to the Christian country, my religion was the religion of Muhammad.
His autobiography in his native language of Arabic is believed to be the only one of its kind, the original words of a Muslim American slave.
Then there came to our place a large army who killed many men and took me and brought me to the Great Sea.
His literacy and culture completely goes against, abolishes, one might say, annihilates the narrative that slaves were not capable of culture. In fact, they were persons with distinct histories, abilities, culture, and background.
Allah Al-Rayis has studied and translated the words of Omar ibn Said.
They sold me into the hands of the Christians, who bound me and sent me on board a great ship, and we sailed upon the Great Sea a month and a half, when we came to a place called Charleston.
He was wealthy and he was highly educated, because in his autobiography he speaks about spending 25 years studying.
Mary Jane Deeb is the chief of the African and Middle East Division at the Library of Congress, where Ibn Said's manuscript now lives.
So there was a man who was caught at the age of 37, and shipped off to South Carolina, in a country he doesn't know, among people whose language he doesn't know.
Ibn Said wrote he was sold to a, quote, small, weak, and wicked man called Johnson. After years of abuse, he fled, but was caught in North Carolina.
He is then captured and brought to a jail cell, and he begins to write on the walls of his jail cell in Arabic. So that attracted attention of pretty important people, because the man who ends up buying him and releasing him from jail was the brother of the governor of North Carolina.
Over time, Ibn Said converted to Christianity. In his 60s, he wrote his own story, but only in Arabic.
It's written in Arabic, and so his masters could not really read it at all. They could not really influence its writing. And so it was really his exact words, unfiltered by the machinery of the editorship of masters and abolitionists, as other slave narratives were.
A machinery Al-Rayas says erased countless narratives, including the fact that up to 20% of Africans enslaved in America were Muslim. Ibn Said, in fact, chose to open his autobiography with a verse from the Quran.
The crux of this Quranic chapter is that it's only God who has the possession and the ownership, both of human beings and of things. And therefore, it seems to me a kind of a hidden text. What Omar is saying is that you guys have no right to own me here.
It's a narrative that challenges the original concept of who the slaves were when they came here. They didn't really have a system of belief. They were uncultured. They didn't have a written system. This is what he brings to the table and basically says that is who we really are.
But before those pages written by Omar ibn Said could be shared with the rest of the world, conservators here at the Library of Congress worked for months behind the scenes to bring those pages back to life.
We're trying to present the item as close to what it looked like at the time as possible.
Sylvia Albro led the effort to rescue the nearly 200-year-old manuscript. The materials themselves, she says, tell us even more about the life of Omar ibn Said.
It's actually surprising that the quality of paper for his manuscript is really pretty good. The fact that he had at his disposal good quality materials is an indication of the respect that he had as a figure, even as a slave.
That respect brought Ibn Said to the attention of prominent abolitionists, missionaries, and linguists at the time, who translated his story and used it in their fight against slavery. The entire manuscript is now available online for a new generation to read Ibn Said's words for themselves. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Amna Nawaz in Washington, D.C.
And what a gift it is to all of us.
He was one of the very last Africans to be taken into slavery in the United States, and the only known African Muslim to have left an autobiography in Arabic about his years in captivity while he was still a slave. In 1807, Omar ibn Said, a 37-year-old Muslim scholar, was captured by an invading African army in Senegal and sold to slave traders. He was taken from his village in Futa Toro to St. Louis Port, where he was sold into slavery. St. Louis is an island at the mouth of the Senegal River that played an important role in the transit of slaves from African countries to the Americas and the Caribbean. This region was one of the main sectors of the so-called triangular trade, which consisted of Europeans coming to West Africa to exchange manufactured goods, like textiles and weapons, in return for slaves. Then the enslaved Africans were loaded onto boats and taken to the Americas, after which the boats would return back to Europe loaded with raw materials like sugar, tobacco, and cotton. These transatlantic crossings saw at least 10 to 12 million people being transported to the Americas as slaves from the 16th to the 19th centuries. Only the stories of a few have been preserved, and Ibn Said's is one of them. Ibn Said was taken into slavery in 1807, a year before the abolishment of the slave trade took effect in the US, and died in 1864, just 1 year before slavery was finally abolished. His story has come to prominence 150 years after his death, when his memoir was added to the US Library of Congress in 2017. Before Ibn Said's abduction, he was an intellectual who spent more than 2 decades of his life studying the Quran and other subjects in his home country. Throughout 15 handwritten pages, Ibn Said's memoir challenges the historical slave narrative about African traditions and culture. His memoir begins with a chapter from the Quran, Surah Al-Mulk, with the verses speaking about dominion, sovereignty or ownership, and the conveying of an overarching message that only God has ownership of creation. The verses, according to experts, could be understood as a message to the slave owners and slave culture prevalent at the time. Then Ibn Said proceeds to tell his own story.
My name is Omar ibn Said. My birthplace was Futa Toro, between the two rivers. I sought knowledge under the instruction of a sheikh called Muhammad Said, my own brother Sheikh Suleiman Kembe, and Sheikh Gabriel Abdal. I continued my studies 25 years, and then returned to my home where I remained for 6 years. Then there came to our place a large army, who killed many men and took me and brought me to the Great Sea, and sold me into the hands of the Christians, who bound me, sent me on board a great ship, and we sailed upon the Great Sea a month and a half when we came to a place called Charleston in the Christian language. There they sold me to a small, weak and wicked man called Johnson, a complete infidel who had no fear of God at all.
Ibn Said eventually ran away from his first owner in Charleston, South Carolina, to Fayetteville, North Carolina, before he was arrested and sold again. But this time, according to his memoir, his new owner, James Owen, was different. Historians who studied Ibn Said's memoir and other documents are of the opinion that Ibn Said spent the rest of his life with the Owen family, who were affiliated with the American Colonization Society, a group that was formed in 1817 to send free African Americans to Africa as an alternative to emancipation in the United States. The group sent thousands of Africans to Liberia.
Between the northern abolitionists and the southern slave plantation owners, there was a middle way, as they called it, and that middle way was colonization, namely convincing as many slave owners to release slaves or buying them and then sending them to Liberia. And those particular people were not universally, it seems, interested in all slaves. They were particularly drawn to men of culture and education, like Omar was.
Ibn Said's skills and intellect made him a well-known person in the entourage, and when he died, a local newspaper published an obituary praising him as a pious Christian, which was unusual in 19th century America. Which takes us to another point that makes Ibn Said's memoir remarkable. Although Ibn Said wrote in his memoir that he converted to Christianity, experts analyzing his memoir say otherwise.
It's one of the things that a number of Muslims did, that's pseudo-conversion. In some countries, they were just forced, and they externally, if you will, conform to that. And then, they actually remain Muslims.
The fact that the opacity of his narrative, when he opens it, for example, by a particular surah from the Quran, that seemed to me to be included as a kind of a message, a hidden message, that his owners had no right over him, that the possession and power all inheres in the hands of God. That this seemed to be to kind of go against the narrative of his conversion, right, or of his slavery itself.
But whether his conversion was real or was a facade for protection like many enslaved Africans in the 19th century, Ibn Said's memoir stands as an important document for the history and narrative of African heritage in the United States.
The whole operation of the slave trade depended upon willfully neglecting the origins of enslavement. And that's one of the reasons why a text like Omar's is so important, because it recovers that suppressed history. Slavery is a silencer. It denies the voices of captive Africans and enslaved people in the Americas. So recovering this text is so important to getting that history back and understanding the lies and violence that were really at the root of the Atlantic slave trade.
Islam has been part of the American religious fabric since the first colonial settlers arrived in North America. And African Muslims were an integral part of creating the United States, from mapping its borders to fighting against British rule. While we do not know exactly how many African Muslims were enslaved and forcibly transported to the Western Atlantic world, scholars believe that roughly 10 to 15% of all enslaved Africans were Muslim, and a much larger number would have been familiar with the religious and cultural practices of Islam, due to the religion's spread throughout Western Africa. Despite the fact that there are no concrete records of the number of Muslims, there are remnants of their presence in historical records dating back to the 16th century, and we can also see them in existing cultural and religious traditions today. Although enslaved Africans were not brought to the modern United States for sale until the early 1600s, they were present on American shores around a century earlier. Spanish colonialists brought enslaved Africans, including enslaved African Muslims, with them to Florida and the southern coast as early as 1513. One of these men, Mustafa Azamuri, called Estevanico, was sold by the Portuguese into slavery in 1522. While enslaved by Spanish conquistador Andrés Dorantes de Carranza, Estevanico became one of the first Africans to set foot on the North American continent. He explored Florida and the Gulf Coast, eventually traveling as far west as modern New Mexico. In addition to exploration, enslaved African Muslims also helped militarily expand British American colonial frontiers. During the French and Indian War, which pitted British America against New France, British Major General Edward Braddock was defeated at Fort Duquesne in 1755. The British retreated east and built a line of forts in modern Huntington County, Pennsylvania. One, called Fort Shirley, was quickly abandoned, but not before a blacksmith could forge a small circular charm featuring the phrase, "No God but Allah," in Arabic. This shows the presence of at least one Muslim man in the British military during the colonial period, and hints at a larger community. African Muslims also fought on both sides of the Revolutionary War. Multiple men with Muslim names appear on the military muster rolls, including the patriots Bafat Muhammad, Yusuf ben Ali, also known as Joseph ben Haley, and Joseph Saba. Other men listed on muster rolls have names that are likely connected to Islamic practice, such as Selampur and Peter Salem, whose names may reflect a form of the Arabic salam, meaning peace. These men often distinguished themselves on the battlefield. They also attained high-ranking positions, such as Civil War Union Captain Moses Osman, who was the highest-ranking known Muslim in that conflict. Despite significant obstacles, enslaved Muslims used their faith to build communities, resist their enslavement, and pursue their freedom. They left numerous written accounts of their experiences in America in the form of letters, diaries, and autobiographies, most of them in Arabic. Omar ibn Said penned an autobiography in 1831, the only known autobiography of an enslaved person in a native African language. They also wrote pages of Arabic for their enslavers and other members of white society, like the American Colonization Society. But instead of writing what the recipients believed was a Bible verse or the Lord's Prayer, they wrote Quranic verses, made genealogical lists, and even pleaded to return home to Africa. They also blended Islam and Christianity. For example, they combined the Basmala and Lord's Prayer in documents, and they inscribed Islam into Christian spaces, such as etching Surah An-Nas into a pew at the First African Church of Savannah. This final chapter of the Quran is meant as a protection, in this case symbolically used against their enslavers. Enslaved Muslims also created objects to practice their faith. In the 1730s, Ayuba Suleiman Diallo wrote multiple copies of the Quran from memory for use in devotion and education. And the WPA narratives, a series of interviews conducted in the 1930s and 40s with formerly enslaved persons and their descendants, are filled with references to other important objects of religious practice, namely beads called tasbih and prayer mats. As Katie Brown, the great-granddaughter of Bilali Muhammad, who was enslaved on Sapelo Island, Georgia, recalls, quote, "Bilali and his wife Phoebe pray on the bead. They bow to the sun and have a little mat to kneel on. The beads is on a long string. Bilali he pull bead and he say, Bilambi Hakabara Muhammadu. Phoebe she say, Amin, Amin," end quote. However, enslaved African Muslims also experienced open hostility and hardship when practicing their faith. Ayuba Suleiman Diallo was pelted with dirt by a white boy in Kent Island, Maryland as he prayed. Others were forced to wear sacrilegious clothing, abandon dietary rules and religious fasting, or abstain from the required daily prayers. An unnamed Moorish slave in Louisiana confirmed this hardship in 1822 when he, quote, lamented that his situation as a slave in America prevents him from obeying the dictates of his religion, unquote. Nevertheless, they persevered and lived their faith. Some became pseudo-converts to Christianity in order to protect themselves and their families or secure their freedom. Lamin Kebi pretended to convert to Christianity to secure passage back to Africa through the American Colonization Society in 1834. However, after returning to Africa, Kebi disappeared into Sierra Leone, surely, quote, still retaining his Mohammedan creed, unquote. The Islam initially brought to America by enslaved Africans did not survive many generations, but it left traces and traditions that are still visible today. The practice of ring shout, a form of religious dance in which men and women rotate counterclockwise while singing, clapping their hands, and shuffling their feet, may have been inherited from enslaved Muslims such as Bilali Muhammad and Salih Bilali in the Georgia Sea Islands. The movement mimics the ritual circling of the Kaaba in Mecca by Muslim pilgrims, called tawaf, and the name shout may come from the Arabic shout, meaning a single run. The WPA narratives also contain reminiscences of rice cakes called saraka, which were handed out during rituals and feast days. From the Arabic word sadaqah, or free will offering, this charity is an aspect of zakat, one of the pillars of Islam. And early blues singers, like those recorded by ethnomusicologist Alan Lomax in Levy Camp Holler, employed singing styles reminiscent of the adhan, or call to prayer. You can always They use sweeping and extended vocalizations to fill the words with intense emotions. Enslaved Muslims were brought to the United States with distinct cultural and religious beliefs, caught in the middle of complicated social and legal attitudes from the very moment they landed on America's Atlantic shores. They succeeded in forming networks and communities, and they maintained their religious identity despite overwhelming odds. The material culture enslaved Muslims left behind, books, writings, clothing, beads, and rugs, and the traditions they cultivated help tell their stories today. Islam has always been an important religion in America. It's essential to develop a national conversation that fosters and augments our collective memory of these men, women, and children. One that honors how the call to prayer has been sounding from sea to shining sea for more than 500 years.
So that's a bit of world history. And if you don't understand that, you're kind of lost in translation of going, wait, how did Africans end up all over the Caribbean? How did they end up in France? How did they end up in Brazil? And what's the story behind it? And that is the story. The story is that these Africans were enslaved. And they were enslaved because of a sugarcane addiction that was going on in Europe. So you always hear about sugar plantations in South Carolina in America. You hear about them throughout the Caribbean. You hear about them in Brazil, which later expanded into cotton and then tobacco. And all of this was being controlled by Jewish Ashkenazi merchants. So there is a connection there that these people that claim to be, of ownership and connection to Israel, that as though they were ancient Israelites, these people also made profit off of the transatlantic slave trade. And you can see that with J.P. Morgan, banking company. Look it up and you'll find the connection between J.P. Morgan and the transatlantic slave trade. You can see that with Johnson & Johnson. You can see that with Tiffany & Co. Multiple companies across the board had a connection to the transatlantic slave trade, and there is a Jewish component to it. So I just wanted to share this information with you guys to show you that Palestine and what's happening with these people is very important. And if we can't spot what's taking place globally with these people and how that relates to us, that it's not something we can ignore because we're an echo chamber. Hey guys, if you want to watch more clips, click here.
And if you want to watch the full podcast, click right here.